Okay, welcome everybody. I can see Donna, Horace, Meredith, Jazz, Amanda, Rosemary, Catherine. Thank you for everybody who has come today. Today we're going to look at fellowships as a means of recognizing your unique set of skills, knowledge, and attributes as PEAL practitioners in higher education. People are still kind of filing in, I can see. So just for 1 minute, as people are still coming in from the waiting room, I'd like you to reflect on this question. Reflect on your experience as a PEAL practitioner. Okay, have you had trouble communicating occasionally with academics? Do you have a shared language with them? Are they unfamiliar with some of your qualifications? So let's just reflect on that for a minute while we wait. Okay, all right, let's get started. Today we're going to be addressing this issue, okay? We're going to talk about the ways that you can gain recognition from your skills. And one of these ways is through gaining a fellowship. In brief, a fellowship is like a means of recognizing knowledge and skill benchmarked against certain standards. Now, there's a range of fellowships that are possibly available to you in your work. Okay, so for instance, one of them is the HERDSA Fellowship Scheme, the Higher Education Research and Development Society of Australasia, which may be something that you would like to explore. The IEAA Fellowship Scheme focuses mostly on international education rather than the tertiary sector per se, but that might be something that you could be interested in. Today, we're going to look mostly at the advanced HE fellowships. You may have seen people walking around with the post-nominals after their names. Now, we're not focusing on this because we recommend it or because we're sort of like promoting it, but because it is probably one of the most globally recognized fellowship schemes, and because I think the majority of universities in Australia recognise this fellowship and offer sort of support for their staff who are going through a fellowship accreditation. Okay, so today we're going to listen to a brief presentation on the Advanced HE Fellowship Scheme. Then we're going to meet some of our peers who have fellowship experience, and then we're going to look at how our practice fits some of the descriptors. And I'm hoping that we'll have plenty of time for questions from people afterwards. So, to begin, I would like to introduce Laura Fairbrother. Laura is a senior fellow through Advanced HE. She has had many years as an ELICOS teacher and a teacher trainer through International House in Australia and overseas, and at UQ for many, many years. Like many of us, Laura moved on during the COVID times. And now she is an acting associate director for quality assurance at Charles Darwin University and a curriculum and learning specialist who is running a HEA support program for the academics at that university. So Laura is going to present to us her knowledge of the HEA scheme and how it fits us as ELICOS people. So Laura, off you go.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks for having me, and thanks for giving me the chance to come and share this, because it really did help to shape my career, definitely, from ELICOS and broadening it out into more of a higher education landscape for me. I did my fellowship back at UQ back in 2020. And we're just seeing your Zoom screen.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. I'll keep telling my story while we go.
There you go, it's your story. Go on.
So I feel really passionately about fellowships, and Sue's absolutely right that they're not the only fellowships, but they are the one that I've got the most experience in. And it meant so much to me that when I moved across from UQ to Charles Darwin University, the first thing I did was bring the fellowship scheme with me, because it had impacted my choices so much. And so to show you in the map visual the global reach that this organization has, it is pretty extensive, as you can see. It's a member-led charity, and they partner with higher education institutions across the globe to basically improve the quality of higher education for staff, students, and for the more broader society as well. Now, Australia are really connected into this. As you can see, about 31 of about 39 universities are members. Now, every time I check this number, one of those numbers changes slightly. So I'm going to just highlight them in yellow and say it's a pretty big number of people who are members or institutions that are members with Advanced HE. So Advanced HE are in over 100 countries. It's got over 174,000 fellows, and we're going to break that down in a minute and tell you a bit more about that. But of that number, more than 6,000 are in Australia. So it's really recognised across this country. So who's eligible? If we move on to the next slide, Sue. Who's eligible to get a fellowship with Advanced HE? Well, anyone whose practice impacts the student experience and or teaching and learning in a higher education setting. And it's recommended that you have 3 to 5 years of experience in doing so, because you do have to meet and evidence certain criteria, which if we click, we'll see what that criteria looks like. And they don't call them criteria, they call them dimensions. So this is the framework that Advanced HE use to determine quality in teaching and learning. It's broken into 3 dimensions. We have professional values, core knowledge, and areas of activity. We're going to look at them a bit more closely later on, so I don't expect you to be able to read these now, but that framework is widely accessible, and it's certainly something that has really helped to shape how I talk about my practice. So these different dimensions really do give me the language I need to help other people who don't necessarily know what I do to understand a bit more closely about what it is that I do. So how is it that 174,000 people have managed to get fellowship using this framework as a guide? Because in that 174,000 people, there'll be a wide variety of roles, a wide variety of different countries, a wide variety of different experiences. So if we click to the next slide, one of the ways they break it down is there are 4 different types of fellowship. Now, regardless of what type of fellowship you're applying for, you use the previous visual, the 3 dimensions, to talk about your practice. So if you look at the first one, associate fellow, then you've got fellow, then you've got senior fellow, and you've got principal fellow. And it's not about time spent in the industry, and it's not about the number of classes you've ever taught, or it's not about that type of experience. The experience they're looking for in this particular fellowship, which is why I really like it, it's not really hierarchical per se. It's more about the breadth of influence that you have. Now, who doesn't love a good metaphor? So I'm going to use one to make it easier for myself. This really helped me to understand the differences between them, because it's really easy to think, oh, well, if I've been teaching for 52 years, I must be a principal fellow. And that's not necessarily the case. So if we look at it using a musical, not that I'm a musician either, but anyway, we'll use music. It's better than my soccer analogy I used to use, because I'm absolutely not a soccer player either. If we focus on a principal fellow, if we liken it to an orchestra, a principal fellow is like the conductor. So they're the ones that create the vision, they choose the work to perform, and they create the strategy around the direction of the whole orchestra. So their influence is probably sitting in a university setting at a national or an international level. So away from music, thinking about universities, that's probably people like vice chancellors, pro-vice chancellors, deputy vice chancellors, all those people that kind of set the path for us as practitioners to go down. If you look at senior fellows, on the other hand, they're more like the first violin player. Again, I'm not a musician, and if there are anyone here, please be kind to me. So these are the people that bring that vision to life and who the rest of the orchestra look to for that kind of clearer direction on bridging the vision to the practice. So these are people like heads of school or heads of discipline in a university setting, and they'll have more of a faculty school influence on the direction. And then if you go down to fellow, you've got more like the people who are in one of the sections, so a string section or a wind section, or, you know, both of those could be fellows. Doesn't matter what instrument you play, you're playing the instrument. And so these are the teachers, essentially. So these are the people who are working with the students and really impacting that student experience directly and really deeply. And then that final level, associate fellow, are the symbols. And I love, in researching for this talk, I researched what's the role of symbols in an orchestra. And it said that they come in to highlight the big moments in the music. And I thought that's a really nice way to describe kind of people like tutors or librarians or careers advisors or even support teachers, perhaps, who just come in and they make the big noise and they have a big impact, but they might not do it every day with the students. They might just kind of pop in and pop out of the student life cycle, but still having quite a big dramatic impact on those students. So they're the different levels. And so it's not role determined. For example, at Charles Darwin University, one of our pro-vice chancellors isn't a principal fellow. They're a fellow because they identify as a teacher and they really love having that connection to the students. So it's not hierarchical and it's not based on length in service. It's really about the influence you have in the teaching and learning space. So if we go to the next visual. So that's the kind of a brief introduction to what it is and the different types. So an actual application, because I always want to know, okay, but what do I have to do? Well, you have to write a context statement. You have to write 300 words that's not assessed, that situates the reader, because you might have someone from India looking at your application. So they need to understand, what does being an educator in Australia look like? Size of institution, where it is, types of students, that type of thing. And also within Australia, the Northern Territory is really different to any of the universities down south, right? So, so that context statement is really important. Then you have to write a reflective narrative. So this fellowship application is a credential of your contribution to and your expertise in teaching and learning in higher education settings. So we capture it as a story, which is why they call it a reflective narrative. You're telling your story. Who are you? What do you do? Why do you do it? And how do you know it works? And it's that capturing of the how do you know it works is the thing that really gets you and makes you stand out as a practitioner. For the different levels of fellowships, there's different word counts. you might say, well, what kind of evidence do I need to put with this application? Is it just a story? Yeah, it is just a story. You don't have to provide evidence like, you know, screenshots of student feedback or anything like that. Or in Charles Darwin, we have My View surveys that the students kind of do at the end of each semester. You don't have to provide those types of things, but what you do have to provide are 2 statements of support that back up your claims. So your boss, for example, would be a logical person to kind of go, yeah, Laura does do that. Actually, I have seen the project that Laura described in her application, and it has had a really great impact, like she says. And it's 2 people, 2 significant people who have experience in teaching and learning. Preferably one of them should have a fellowship. But again, it depends on who they are and why they're supporting you. So that's the mechanics of the application. So if we go to the next slide, why should we care about this, and why are fellowships really important? And that's the thing that has made me really want to come and share this with as many people as I can, and why I brought it to CDU. First of all, it puts people, like in the picture you can see there, it puts people in a room together. So in that picture, you can see language and learning advisors sitting with academics, sitting with learning designers, all talking about quality teaching. And these are all people who are applying for fellowships. So we build a community. The community is really important, especially when those different communities have different languages that they speak to describe quality practice. So this gives us our shared language amongst a huge variety of people sitting in that room. It also gives you evidence of your commitment to education, and also it measures the success that you've had in that commitment to education. Plus, as Sue mentioned earlier, it gives you the chance to put little letters after your name, and who doesn't love those? So the final word that I'll share with you is, it's really important if you're looking to have a deeper impact into the higher education landscape. This is definitely something you want to be looking at, because increasingly in job advertisements, we're seeing a lot more adverts saying kind of preferred candidates will have a fellowship with advanced HE. So we're seeing it more and more and more and more and more. And actually, it's not the best statistic to end on, perhaps, but of the nearly 40 people that we've helped gain a fellowship at CDU, almost a quarter of them have been successful in attaining work elsewhere. But but it shows it works, and they have written to me and directly attributed the application process.
You've gone a bit quiet on us, Laura.
Probably a good signal for me to just wrap up and hand back to you, Sue.
Okay, so thank you, Laura. All right, you'll have an opportunity to ask Laura some questions later if you'd like to know a little bit more about it. Laura gave us some testimonials from people who have been through the programs that she runs. So a lot of people have very positive experiences in going through the process of applying for a fellowship. And we're going to meet 2 of our peers who have either already gone through a fellowship process or is currently going through. So I'd like to introduce you to Craig Grigg. Craig is a language teacher and an academic manager. He's worked at a range of colleges and institutes in Queensland, and is currently at Griffith University and is going through the application process through Griffith. A lot of different universities run programs to support their people as they do their applications. Jess is currently working for Australian Catholic University as a digital curriculum designer. But when she went through her fellowship program at UQ, she was an ELICOS language teacher and senior teacher at UQ, what is now UQ College. Okay, so I'm going to talk to both of them, give them an opportunity to share their experience. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Jess. I'll begin with Craig. Craig, you're going through the experience now through Griffith University. Can you tell us what that's like?
Well, yeah, it came across my bow probably a few months back. Griffith University has quite a developed professional development pathway to fellowships. So there are some micro credentials that one can do. One's called Teaching for Learning, one's called Curriculum Design for Learning. And basically, if those are done, they're free to enroll in for any it got opened up to the ELICOS teachers, so that's why I got interested in it. I didn't hear about it on the casual academic side of the fence. Yeah, so I'm working away through those modules and I'm enjoying it. If they are completed, I can then, if I want to, enroll in a grad cert in university learning and teaching, which is also actually provided free if I get motivated enough to get everything done and find the time. Motivation's probably not an issue. It's more like the time. We all have busy lives.
So what sort of commitment does it take from you? I mean, how often are you meeting with, is it a face-to-face process or online or asynchronous?
Yeah, you can do drop-ins, but mostly if you want, you can be totally off-grid and just involve yourself with the content on a Canvas platform. It's really nice. I mean, to look at the process that Laura just pitched, it's, to be honest with you, that way seems a little easier. But I'm enjoying the process as well. Like I'm enjoying peeling back the program itself and looking into things. I mean, you asked the question before about us maybe not talking the language of academics when we come out of ELICOS. And I think that's true. Like most of us who come out of ELICOS are educators. Our boots are on the ground. We work with methodology. We do things naturally. We often don't think about the processes in which we engage the students. Whereas we're mixing with academics, researchers who are enrolled in these programs as well. And yeah, there's definitely two fields of thought there, and some think about what they're doing and some do what they do.
Okay, thanks, Craig. That's kind of interesting. I wasn't aware of how Griffith did. A lot of universities run support programs. Some of them are face-to-face, like at CDU and at UQ, where people come together in a big room and go through workshops. That's what Jess went through when she went through the process at UQ in 2019. So that was quite a long time ago, Jess. If you reflect back on that, has it had an impact on your career? Maybe it didn't, maybe it did. But how has it affected you? What did you learn?
Oh gosh, so much. I think it was, I mean, a lot of the things that both you and Laura have talked about, this, feeling like part of the community. I'd worked at ICT, which was a University English Language Centre at UQ for 17 years, but I don't think I ever felt like I belonged to the higher education broader community until I was part of, and I think it was actually the day I received my fellowship pin, that I really felt like I belonged to something much bigger than just ELICOS, even though we'd been working across, into different programs at the university. So it was a bit of a game changer, an opportunity to share language about teaching and learning with people from lots of different places. Yes, you do get a pin. Thanks for the question in the chat. I should have worn it. And it now that I'm working as a professional staff member at ACU, it definitely makes me feel welcome in conversations, like I can talk about my teaching and learning in an authoritative manner, and I think and find like-minded professionals. So I come across other professional staff members and academic staff members who are fellows, and it's always a nice moment to find out when they went through the process and what they thought of it and what they've gained ever since, and they're all positive stories.
Okay, thanks, Jess. I was just going to say I just found mine.
Oh, yay!
From UQ. I don't know if everyone gives you a pin. I don't think CDU gives you a pin, but anyway. Thanks a lot, Jess. What I found is what Jess said is really pertinent, in that if you're working in a language school attached to a university, you can sometimes feel that you're not really part of the community. But then by being accepted onto a fellowship support program and going through the program as a third space professional, you do develop really good relationships with the academics who are going through the process with you, and that leads to collaborative opportunities and the chance. I mean, I got quite a lot of opportunities out of doing it myself through meeting academics and then mentoring academics through the process. So, Craig, if you could offer one piece of advice to a PEAL practitioner who's thinking about applying at their institute, what would that be?
I think for me, as I've dug into the coursework, I kind of regret, to a certain extent, not delving into more theory-based teaching. So, in other words, kind of just doing what, as I said before, just doing what I do based on maybe content that's provided by the institute. You kind of end up just using that regularly, and sometimes you don't actually delve into, say, trialing some problem-based learning or task-based learning or criterion reference instruction or something, whatever it is that the theory is based on, and then using that to reflect and unpack. If I had have done that process a little more intricately, I think that the fellowship would be easier for me. But now I'm kind of tracing back some steps a little bit. As I said, I think I do a lot of those things really well. I engage the students, but I don't know why. So I've got to look at the why and reflect and align it with theory and see where it's coming from, and not just wing it.
So, so what you're saying is you perhaps didn't do some of the reading earlier, some of the underlying learning theories that your practice rests on.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously with through my master's degree and TESOL, some of the adult learning theories are slightly different to ELICOS or TESOL methodology, right? So, or there's another focus. So, I'm enjoying unpacking a few of those things and trialing them on my students and then reflecting.
That's really interesting. I think Laura would agree with this, because I'm seeing her nodding, because but when I was at CDU, I've attended many of the workshops that Laura was delivering, and what a lot of the academics were really struggling with was showing how they know something works. So people, some academics work from, they haven't really been trained, so they're working from instinct, and they can feel that something works, but they can't really articulate why. And that's because they haven't had a grounding in the theory. So going through the process helps them with that. But also, I think those people who are coming from an ELICOS background may already bring that with them, especially if they've done a master's or potentially a Delta. But they may not have read all of the theory in higher ed. You've got to go and read your Biggs and Tang and learn about constructive alignment and so forth. Would you agree, Laura?
Actually, I've just been thinking, listening to Craig describe that and thinking about a conversation that Jessica and I have actually had quite recently, is something that ELICOS teachers do really well is talk about what they do. And we lesson plan, and we really break down into steps the things that we know and love. And so for us, teaching is really natural. And so for academics, it's not such a natural space because there's not as much sharing. Like I'm desperately miss being next to a photocopier near Jess as she's planning her lesson or photocopying her materials, because I'll go, oh, give me that. That looks fun. How do I do it? And in 10 seconds, she stepped me through how to do it. And that's what this application requires. It requires a step-by-step description of what you do and why you do it that way. And I think ELICOS naturally more lends itself to that type of thinking, or at least certainly in my experience, and when I speak to other ELICOS teachers, it's certainly their experience too. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So Jess, if you could offer PEAL practitioners one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think it would be find a buddy. Find someone you've worked alongside, because sometimes it's hard to remember what it is you've done and the impact it's had. But sometimes your colleagues see that more than you do, or they can remind you of it and share their version of it. So sometimes having, be a joiner. If there's a group you can join, if there's workshops, forums, anything where you get a chance to listen to other people going through that same process, then do it, so that you can, get fresh perspectives, and get the ball rolling on the thinking about what you do, and because you've got a lot of writing to do about it.
I know it doesn't look like a lot of words when you look at this. Oh, yeah, it's not that many words, but it's actually, it's a fair amount of work, probably more work than it appears once you actually sit down and get writing. And I think that's a really good point too, Jess, because different universities, and like many universities, support their people through the fellowship process, but that all looks different in different places. And if you're not in a university where you can have the group experience or group workshops, I think it's really important that you do find a buddy to work with, and like a peer or someone that you can share with. So thank you very much. Okay, so we've heard from Laura, who's given us an overview of what advanced HE is and what it looks like and what you need to do. We've heard from a couple of our peers. Well, I'm going to look now a little more closely at the dimensions. So I keep going to say criteria, but the way you're going, and look at what you do that helps you, that meets the dimensions. After that, we're going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions of either Laura or Jess or Craig. Okay, so, all right, so one of the dimensions, and Laura, please jump in if I'm making a mistake, right? So one of the dimensions is describing your area of activity. If you are a fellow, you need to meet all 5 areas. If you are an associate fellow, you only need to meet 2 of them. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so, but if you're applying for fellow, you have to meet all 5. So, as ELICOS teachers, as PEAL practitioners, I would imagine that some of this looks quite familiar to you. Okay, so have a look at the 5 areas and tell me how many of these 5 areas are part of your regular practice as a PEAL practitioner. One thing that's important is in order to apply, you need to have had these years of teaching in higher ed, but at AQF level 5. Okay, thank you. So for AQF level 5, which is diploma level or higher.
Yeah, it's AQF level 5 and above. So anything above. So vet practitioners can, if they're teaching into diploma level.
Okay, so you need to describe these areas of activity within that context. So have a think, pop in chat. How many of these areas of activity are you confident that you can demonstrate or have experience and have impact in? I'm pretty sure you could all meet A5. You're all here. So 3 or 4, yeah? Would anyone else like to share how many they feel confident that these are part of their regular practice? Okay, so let's think about this. A few people, okay. All right, James, we'll come to that question towards the end, yeah? Okay, I would imagine that many PEAL practitioners, okay, probably, I mean, a lot of people in ELICOS probably do that, all 5 in your regular practice. You might be a little bit shy about posting that in chat. Yeah, okay. Okay, Meredith, we'll come to questions at the end. So, but you all design and plan learning activities, all right? You may or may not design programs, but you're regularly planning lessons, you're regularly planning a series of lessons, okay? All right. You teach and support learning, you choose approaches, whether your approach is whether you're using an inductive approach or a deductive approach, or maybe you're a bit old school PPP or something, but you have approaches that you know are appropriate to your learning environment. Okay, all right. So assess and give feedback for learning. You all do that, I'm quite sure, through formative and through summative activities. Every day you're giving formative feedback. I'm sure many of you may not be working directly in assessment at university level. Okay, maybe not. But if you're working in support, you're helping students to prepare for their assessments, if you're teaching students how to write their assignments or write their reports, then you are working in the A3 space, okay? You guide and you support learners, okay? And you are regularly enhancing your continuing professional development. I think that's a really strong feature of most ELICOS teachers. Okay, so as Craig was saying, as John was saying, that A5 gave a bit of trouble. So it's about applying the PD to your practice. That's true, A5. So you've got to show that, okay, I've gone and I've done a grad cert in teaching and learning, or I've attended a conference and I've seen a new way of teaching something, and I came back and I applied that to my own practice, and it was successful in these ways, less successful in other ways. Next time I would try something different. I think you probably do go through that away. And as Laura says, Advanced HE recognises formal and informal PD. So can you give me some examples of informal PD, Laura?
Yeah, a bit like what I was describing with Jess and I at the photocopier. So I could describe me seeing Jess preparing a lesson and preparing materials, and then us discussing it, and then me taking that and applying it to my practice as professional development, because I have developed my practice through that interaction. So anything where you're watching YouTube videos or you're talking with your colleagues or anything that develops your practice is professional development.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then being able to talk about how you applied what you learned.
And the impact that has had on the student experience, or wherever you're describing the influence or the impact. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the areas of activity. Now, when you sit down to write, if you are applying at fellow level, you will write a separate narrative for each of these areas of activity. Okay, so if you're applying at senior level, let's say you're a manager and you're applying at a senior level, you will write a longer narrative that you'll interweave the areas of activity, but the fellowship application is really structured. So 5 different narratives to tackle each of the 5 areas. Okay, so that's what you're, this is just a snippet from somebody's application. So it would look something like that. Now it's very, very reflective. So as an ELICOS teacher, you'd have gone through reflective practice. Thanks, Laura. So 600 words for each area. Thank you. So as an ELICOS teacher, if you've been through a CELTA or a Delta or something like that in the past, you've done a lot of reflection. So you know how to write reflectively, unlike some of your academic colleagues who don't necessarily have that background. So another thing that you'll notice is that when you demonstrate your professional values and knowledge, you then interweave that through the narrative. So we have A2, for example, here in this example, teach and support learning through appropriate approaches. You write 600 words describing what you do, and then as you can see here, you then interweave or you signal how your professional values and your core knowledge is demonstrated through that area of activity. So that's what it would look like. So let's take these descriptors now. So you need, as a fellow, to demonstrate all of the professional values and all of the core knowledge. Now, you don't have probably a lot of time to look at this, but skim through this and tell us in chat which of the values and which of the core knowledge do you feel most confident you can evidence in your practice. Okay, when you're describing your activities, you're confident you show that you respect your learners. Okay, and you can cope with diverse groups, for example. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to think. Let's pop that into chat and see what we come up with. Awesome. We've got some coming up in chat now. People like K4. I probably should have turned this into a poll so we could look at it all together. Okay, thank you for everybody who's popping their descriptors into chat there. Now, I'm only asking you to give me the ones that you feel most confident in. I'm sure that most of you could probably do all of them, to be honest. I think you probably could. Laura's nodding with me now, but I've kind of put you on the spot and I'm getting you to think. If you actually had the time to sit down and reflect on this more, you would probably start to remember examples of how you do each of these things. James has commented in chat that V4 looks hard. Respond to the wider context in which higher education operates, recognizing implications for practice. Laura, can you give us some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, and actually, this is probably the one that many academics don't struggle with at all because they have to respond to professional bodies. So people like nursing, who are teaching nursing students who are going to go into hospitals and become nurses, that's what they have to talk to. So the wider context is anything that sits beyond the university setting. So if we're working with international students who are going into those, if you're doing a prep course for people to go into Bachelor of, and then any of those bachelors, you would talk about why they have to have great communication skills, because once they go through their degree, they need it for their degree, but they'll need it actually more broadly to get jobs in their field. So actually you'll have, I imagine, depending on the type of, support, pathway courses that you're teaching into and things, you'll have a wider variety to actually talk to. So if you're working with future engineers or future nurses or future business accountants and people like that, that's the type of thing that you would talk about. We're not just learning for learning's sake. Why are the students there?
As an example of that, I can remember when Jess, for instance, was at UQ, she was working in the PEAL space and had to work with dentistry students in order to help them meet the communication requirements they needed to pass their practicums, for instance, and that was set by the external body, for instance. So for those of you who are working in the PEAL space, think of it that way, okay? These students, the courses that I'm supporting, and the students that I'm supporting, what do they need to do in order to meet the professional attributes set by a professional body? Other things can be the wider context in which higher education operates. Yeah, I think it's basically it's their employment, really, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I noticed that K4 seems to come up a lot in the chat. And that's I really like that, because I think K4, for those of us who have been around in ELICOS for a long time and who had to go through the great pivot of 2020, we all became masters of teaching via Zoom or Teams or Collaborate, and being language teachers, we became masters of building engaging learning experiences online, which some of our academic peers didn't necessarily have the opportunity to do. So it doesn't surprise me that so many people seem to be quite confident with K4. V3, I think, is interesting as well. Not that many people mention V3. Oh yeah, perhaps more than I think. But using scholarship or research or professional learning is to make evidence-based choices in your practice. I would suspect that many of you do that. If you've done a master's in applied linguistics at some point, that's had an influence on the way you teach a class. You may need to go back and reread some of your papers again, but I'm sure things like that have had an influence on how you work. Okay. Something that I think something I think we, coming from ELICOS, have an advantage in is how learners learn. Okay, we having gone through often the teacher training type programs that we've been through, we often have a really good understanding of the scaffolding students need, okay, in order to learn, and what we can do to set them up for success. And I think most ELICOS teachers have good understanding of that. So I would expect many people to be really comfortable with K1 and with K2 as well. Okay, so this 4:20, it takes us to the end of the presentation stage. So I want to have 10 minutes for questions. But for next steps, if you are interested in this, visit the Advanced HE website. Perhaps someone could pop that into chat for me. Have a look a bit further. You may be interested in some of the other fellowships as well. So have a look at HERDSA, have a look at IEAA as well, okay, because you may find that if Advanced HE fellowships are not for you, maybe one of the others will work. If you're working with the university, explore the fellowship development programs at your institution. Okay, most of them have something that you may be able to apply for. So, okay, any questions? So I've seen in chat, James asked quite early how long it takes for someone to go through the process. Okay, and Laura replied and said it depends. Her program is 6 months. There are 12-week programs and people can go it alone. Has anyone here done the fellowships and done it alone? You did it alone, John?
Well, at Griffith, if you go through the writing pathway, you work with a mentor. And they usually, and this might have changed a little bit because since the HEA has updated its criteria, but it could take as long as 6 or 7 months, depending on how, that was kind of their from application process to be accepted to applying, because that's kind of how it worked here through the final writing. But it didn't take me that long. So we went through it pretty quickly. In between teaching, so I was able to really focus on it. It probably about 8 to 10 weeks of solid writing. But it really just kind of depends on how well you can gather your evidence and then get that onto paper. So there were sections that I spent a lot more time trying to work my way through, and others that I was able to just whip out really quickly.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, James also asked AQF level 5 criteria. That means you can't count teaching on academic English preparation programs. Laura, can you answer that?
Yeah, so that was one of the first things that I wanted to know as a person going into fellowship. Like, does my teaching count? Because I'm a bit bored of being called just an English teacher. And so it's because you're teaching prep students who are going into bachelor level programs, you're teaching at AQF, in most cases, level 6. So you are already teaching at AQF level 5 and above. So if you're teaching a general English class, then it doesn't count because that's not a higher education setting. But because you're PEAL practitioners supporting students going into a tertiary environment, and many of them will be going into bachelor level programs or master's level programs, it's absolutely eligible. You have to be able to demonstrate your practice in those environments. So even if you're a general English teacher as well, you wouldn't talk about your general English teaching. You would only talk about the impact that you're having on students going to university, because it's a higher education application. Does that make sense?
Okay. Catherine Baker asks why development programs look so different. Is there standardization? I think there's standardization for the final product.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Laura, maybe you can talk about that. But different institutions tackle things in different ways. So Laura?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to remember, that every institution in Australia is different and the cohort of students is different. And so we have to avoid that standardization. And that's why Advanced HE give you quite a lot of freedom to approach this application in your own way. And that's why they've chosen a narrative kind of story setting application, as opposed to everyone must meet this criteria in this way, in this time, using these words. So it's a lot more flexible, and some institutions are really supportive of it and do a real hands-on process, because I know the value of community, and others kind of are a bit more laissez-faire in how they kind of, yeah, it's something you can do and check in now and again if you want to. And actually, one of the things that we're doing in Australia in the next 12 months is coming together. All the program coordinators are coming together to share their programs with each other, to talk about what's working and what's not working in the programs. So there's going to be more sharing, but not for standardization purposes, just for experience purposes. Because yeah, like Sue said, the product is the standardization.
Okay, thank you. Now, just looking for other questions. Catherine, Kat's made a really good point. You've got to factor in the time needed for the support statements, which is absolutely true. It takes quite a long time for someone to validate what you've written and to write a support statement. I can vouch for that because I've done it myself, and I really hate it when someone sort of asks for something like within a week. Okay, so that's a really, really good point. You do need to pick your referees and approach them. So Meredith says, how far back can your teaching experience go? She hasn't taught for a year, but she's currently working with academics. I think Meredith's a learning designer, a bit like Jess. So how would that work, Laura?
So you are expected to kind of have currency in your practice. So they're looking for experience over the last 3 years. If it's at fellow level, it's about 3 years of practice. But if you have had like a year off, or if you have a bit of a break and you've only got a year, but you've had 20 years of experience, then you can use that 20 years backstory to talk about your current practice. But if you haven't taught for more than 3 years, I'd probably wait for a while if you're back into it, because they are that depth of practice is something that's part of the criteria.
So if, for example, Meredith, she's not teaching per se, but she's collaborating with academics to create learning experiences.
Yeah, that's starting to venture into senior fellowship territory, and a really valued part of the educational landscape. So whether you're direct teaching or whether you're influencing the teaching of others, still very valuable. Advanced HE have a tool. I'll put the link in the chat in a second. They have a category tool that you go through a series. I think it's about 18 questions, all multiple choice. And it will spit out at the end what level of fellowship your practice is probably most akin to. So I'll find that link now and pop that in the chat for people.
Okay, thanks. Meg's made a comment in chat. If you're an ELICOS teacher wanting to find an academic teacher buddy, find an academic who teaches in the academic language and learning unit, or potentially one of the applied linguistics lecturers or something. So that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you.
Can I offer another piece of advice there as well? Is
yeah.
go to LinkedIn and do a search for the little post-nominals after the names, so FHEA or SFHEA, depending on what level you're thinking of going for. And it's like a cult. It is strange. Anyone who gets a message from a stranger that says, oh, you're a fellow, I'm thinking about doing it, they will become your best friend immediately, because the value of it is really innate. Like I've had people, I made a joke about, I mean, it's not a joke, it's real, but it was funny that people are leaving because of this fellowship program that we run. But also when people arrive at CDU and they find out there's a fellowship program, I'm the first person they come and find. I'm their new best friend because I can connect them with all the other fellows. And you've got your people because you all talk teaching in the same way. So yeah, LinkedIn is a really good place for that. And don't worry about contacting complete strangers. They will welcome you in and give you their baked bread.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. We're just about done. Amanda wants to know about teaching overseas to validate AQF level 5+. That's the last question there, I think.
If it's in a university setting, if it's a higher education university setting, it's a globally recognized fellowship. So if you've worked at universities abroad, it absolutely counts. But remember that 3-year currency thing. If it was 25 years ago and bears not much relationship to what you do now, I wouldn't be relying on that to get you the fellowship. But so that currency is as determined by you and how you write it.
Thank you. Okay, so Laura's popped the fellowship category tool in. We've also put links to the other fellowship programs into the chat. So if you're interested in exploring, you can have a look. I would really like to thank Laura and Craig and Jess for coming along today, for sharing their experience. I think fellowships are a really good way for us as PEAL practitioners to demonstrate our knowledge and skills and get recognised within the sector. So I really urge you all to have a look and see what fits you, which fellowship category suits you, and which type of fellowship suits you. So thank you so much for coming along. I'm really grateful. That was really great. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'd also just like to thank you, Sue, for pulling this session together and for the idea as well. It was a really useful one. So thanks to Sue and the other PEAL conveners.
Thank you.